I'm George غالاوي, and I present كلمة on الميادين television. Here we are in London. I speak my words freely, either in Parliament, on television, here on the streets of London. كلمة means free word. That's what I speak. So كلمة is a two-way conversation. Check it out on الميادين television. Welcome to كلمة with me, George Galloway, on الميادين television, coming to you from London, but discussing South Africa. Amandla! Power to the people. That was the slogan of the South African Liberation Movement, the ANC, the African National Congress. Now, not a lot of people know that long before you knew me in solidarity with the peoples of the Arab world, I was a militant in the fight against apartheid in South Africa. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, as a teenager and a young man, that was my principal cause. In fact, I am one of the only people on the left in Britain who travelled the length and breadth of apartheid South Africa under the jackboot then of white supremacy, white minority rule. I did so, of course, as an agent of the ANC under the instructions of the ANC. And in parenthesis, every house that I slept in, every car that I travelled in, every dinner that I ate, every rand that I had in my pocket was supplied to me by Jewish militants of the African National Congress. So don't imagine that Jews have to be with apartheid. In fact, some of the greatest heroes of the ANC struggle were Jewish, including some of the great leaders, Joe Slovo, Ruth First, Albie Sachs, and many, many others. That's an important point for the Arab audience in particular to grasp. Nobody in South Africa needs reminding of that. I travelled the length and breadth of apartheid South Africa. I even gave the blood from my nose at the hands of a police officer in the Guguletu police station in Cape Town. I never forgot his name. It was Campbell. I've hated Campbells ever since, but you'd have to be Scottish to quite grasp that one. My point is, the freedom struggle in South Africa was victorious, but the freedom struggle has not ended. Because although white minority rule, white supremacy, apartheid itself has been smashed, the mass of the people in South Africa are not free from economic oppression. They are not free from poverty. And there's another problem. I'm sorry to raise it. Believe me, it pains me to do so. That many of my comrades in the struggle, some of whom I was shoulder to shoulder with at that time, have miraculously, in the course of a very short period of time, transformed themselves from fighters for liberation, literally with a gun in their hands, to being multi-millionaire plutocrats, some of them even billionaires. And it's very difficult to see how they did that. I name no names, but some of my closest friends at the time have transformed themselves into international business figures and have left the ethics that guided their struggle behind. Or do they still have them in their heart? That's one of the things we're going to be discussing tonight. I still support the ANC. Others of my comrades, Ronnie Casserills and others, one of the great leaders of the struggle, another Jewish leader, by the way, they have effectively now left the ANC. I never have. I don't know, and I hope that I never will. But the ANC is disappointing many people, disappointing many of its supporters. That much cannot be gainsaid. But we now have a new leader of the ANC. We now have a president who was not just a militant, but a communist militant leader of the ANC. will he make a difference? If he doesn't, then the hopes of the people will have been dashed. The love of the South African people for the ANC remains very deep and high, however, as could be seen in the outpouring of grief and the outpouring of strength upon the death of the great Winnie Mandela, laid to rest in the last few days. Winnie Mandela was treated badly by many, outside and inside South Africa. But I knew her when she was literally what was called a non-person, when she could not be quoted, when she was effectively airbrushed from Brandfort, where she was living in a kind of internal exile, and effectively ceased to exist. But she always existed in the hearts of the people of South Africa, and I believe that she deserves always to exist in the hearts of the people of South Africa. So what happens now? Will South Africa's new president avoid mistakes that others have made in the past? Will he, as I believe he should, return more to the political roots of both himself and the movement and fight for the interests of the people who need the ANC most? The millionaires have no need of the ANC. Millionaires everywhere have no need of political parties. It's the poor masses who have that need. Well, enough from me. I'm just the distinguished amateur here, or rather the enthusiastic amateur here. The distinguished guests are all in the audience. So let's go to the first of the speakers. Yes, sir, in the middle row.
Yeah, my name is William Spring. I've been a journalist for many years. In fact, you can't hardly believe it, but I've outlived the original paper I published in, which is the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. That went down, I'm afraid.
Many more years, William, many more.
Anyway, I can also I do have some knowledge of Southern Africa. I have had experience, of living in a regime which I'm afraid was not as promising as we had hoped. I refer to the Mugabe regime. I was under Mugabe, and I was also a journalist there. I had to leave, unfortunately, and leaving Africa was the saddest day of my life and our family. But we managed to get out. And what I'd say is this. I continue to do journalism, but Southern Africa has always been a concern of mine. But I go back to the days of the frontline states. When I was down in Southern Africa, I couldn't actually travel to South Africa because I was in Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe was a frontline state. We want to see democracy, of course, but unfortunately the leadership in South Africa betrayed the people of Zimbabwe when under Mbeki. We had hoped, and Zuma, we had hoped that they would pressure Mugabe into a much more, liberal situation, but they wouldn't and didn't. And
maybe they thought the Zimbabwean political system was the business of Zimbabweans.
Well, true, but on the other hand,
maybe they thought they'd overthrown colonialism and didn't want to start practicing it.
That's a valid point, George. But I would say that the solidarity was needed between the masses in South Africa with the masses in Zimbabwe, and that wasn't eventuated through the presidencies of Mbeki and Zuma. Both ignored the scandal in Zimbabwe, and the end result was that there was an internal revolution, but it wasn't a revolution really. It was simply a replacement of Mugabe by Mnangagwa, who was also, I'm afraid, a real criminal, having...
Well, look, if you don't mind me saying, this might be a minority view that you have. Let's test it as part of all the other arguments that we're going to be discussing today. Who would like the microphone next? Yes, brother. Go ahead, sir.
My name is Alex Akoman. I'm originally from Côte d'Ivoire, and I'm a project manager and also a teacher here in the UK. Welcome. So just touching on what the friend I've just said in terms of the way he's portraying the Zimbabwean situations. Basically, I'm just an African, and we watch the news, we see what's happening. Mnangagwa and Mugabe, as you all know, were all in the fight since the 70s up till the independence. And just recently, in 2014, he was appointed as the deputy president as far as the law of the country is concerned. Now, late 2017, few things were about to happen, and the army has to ensure that the law is respected. And that's what happened. So I'm not going to the details of internal politics.
Not least because we're discussing South Africa rather than
But
Zimbabwe.
exactly. So again,
that, brother.
Moving on, as we all know, Zimbabwe was a country who really helped in the struggle for the liberation of South Africa. And the ANC, most of the leaders of the ANC went through Zimbabwe to get shelter and also get support in order to achieve what we achieved in the 90s. So today we are gathered here to talk about South Africa. And lately things have moved on in South Africa, especially in terms of the leadership of the country and also the new leaders and what we're going to do in order to address the issues of the people.
In what way do you think Cyril Ramaphosa will be different from Jacob Zuma?
Right. As politicians, we need to look at the action we are taking, not the speeches. And he was inaugurated on the 15th of February. And I think the first steps was basically the cabinet, and second step was action on the ground. And I've seen that the main issue in most countries raised as corruptions, action has been taken, and the police were raided the Gupta family's home in South Africa because Gupta families...
the Durban family which supported financially Jacob Zuma and his family over many years, yeah?
Yes, and also the Gupta family are seen as the symbols of those who are involved in corruption at the highest level. So
some might think that's convenient, though, that they are conveniently Asian. They are conveniently Asian. They are the symbol of bourgeois corruption. There are plenty of other corrupt people.
That's true. That's true. People have different views. But I'm talking here about actions taken by by those who are just been so in power. And what I'm saying is also backed by various organizations like the Federation of the Trade Unions and also many other organizations who have been waiting for the previous administration to do something about it, but nothing happened. And it has to start somewhere. And as I said, Gupta family as the symbols of those who are in the highest positions involved in corruptions and sometimes murder cases. So the police, the special force of the police has started, and the prosecutor made it clear, I think on the 16th of February, that the AJ Gupta, one of the brothers of the Gupta, the police is after him, and they consider him as somebody who is escaping, running away. So there would be some discussion going, some work going on because he moved from South Africa to another country. I don't want to mention the countries here, but they're working to ensure that he comes back and the police continue the investigation. But as we speak, the investigation are continuing. So it's a step which is important, and from top they can go down, and this is what I'm...
No, it's a very important point. Yes, sir, you next.
I'm Dr. Shepard Mpofu, and I teach at a university in South Africa. It's quite interesting and illuminating what my brothers have just said. And one of the most important things that we have to acknowledge is that South Africa is a moral stature in Africa and probably in the world. And it's supposed to stand up for certain issues and certain rights of citizens across Africa, and the Zimbabwe issue being one of them. But what's more important now are the changes that are happening within South Africa. And I've a few interventions that I want to make. Firstly, the definition of corruption or state capture, as we might want to call it in South Africa, in the current South Africa. And for me, the Guptas are just scapegoats of corruption that has always been happening in South Africa. And there's, since independence, you know, or since the end of apartheid, I've always argued that apartheid with a capital A ended in South Africa, but what remains is an apartheid with a small letter A. South Africa is one of the most unequal societies in Africa. And when you look at corruption, we cannot begin to discuss and look at corruption using the corruption of the Guptas as the example and the only legitimate type of corruption. What informs the high levels of poverty in South Africa, inequality in South Africa since independence? And also one of the most interesting is Winnie Mandela is laid to rest, probably the first or one of the very few struggle icons whose negative aspects or evil aspects have been put together with their positive aspects before their burial. And it's quite important, and also it should be very welcome, especially by us academics, that now we can begin to discuss the defects of even Mandela. We will discuss the defects of Thabo Mbeki when he dies and every other struggle icon when they die. And you find that in South Africa, you have had a situation where for a very long time, Winnie Mandela in the press has been demonized, treated negatively. But Winnie Mandela is probably the only woman who was standing in South Africa during apartheid while the men were in prison. And the apartheid regime didn't know what to do with her. And she kept the spirit of the struggle going. And my last intervention is the mother of the nation tag that has been put on Winnie. No one can take that away. I remember after the massacres, students' massacres, Winnie appeared on television saying, "My children have been massacred." That's the mother of the nation tag. You know how important it was during apartheid. There's not even a single man who stood up and said, "My children have been massacred in South Africa." So the contributions that Winnie has made in South Africa are quite important. And what the people are now discussing, the negative and the positive aspects, is something that we as academics, as citizens, as historians, we need to put that into perspective whenever we discuss the departure from this earth of the struggle icons. They were never perfect, and the problematic thing, or well, maybe because of patriarchy, we discuss the negatives, and it's mostly male writers in the newspapers, male commentators on Twitter, male commentators on televisions telling us how negative or how deviant Winnie was.
No, I'm keeping you till after the break because there's only a minute or two left. So I want to respond to you, if I may.
Sure.
It is time to critique Nelson Mandela also. It is. And if you want mine, as a struggler for decades, I believe that Nelson Mandela made a profound mistake in turning away from the principles of the ANC's charter and the program of the ANC. I think he made an incorrect evaluation of the balance of forces that would exist in the world. At the moment that he did so, things looked very bad. But within a few years, it was obvious it wasn't the end of history. It was obvious that there was a possibility of alternative models of development, that capitalism was not going to be king forever, and that we had to kneel in front of imperialism. As a quick shorthand critique, what do you think of that?
Well, Nelson Mandela, soon after independence, he struggled with capitalists or what we now call white monopoly capital, even though ANC has refused to use that name. And Nelson Mandela, he did a great job in trying to unify the nation, but he did it to a certain extent to a fault. He failed to look for the interests of black South Africans first in the whole thing. And that's why, in most cases, Nelson Mandela is probably the only black person some white racist South Africans are willing to have dinner with, or were willing to have dinner with. Hence, we had some thoughts or some, myths that when Mandela dies, all black people are going to chase white South Africans from. This is what they believed, and it shows the extent to which Nelson Mandela actually betrayed or deferred the dreams of black South Africans who thought, with the coming of independence, with the coming of Nelson Mandela into State House, things are going to change. Things never changed because Nelson Mandela just became, or as he is now, is just a national mascot who's...
Well, I can't remain silent if you use the words like betrayed. I'm not saying that Mandela betrayed anybody. I'm saying that Mandela could have done better, and Cyril has to do better, much better. But there'll be more right after this break. You're watching Kalima with me, George Galloway, in London, talking about South Africa for Mayadeen television. We took the Kalima camera onto the streets of London to ask the people what they knew about apartheid, about the situation in South Africa. Let's hope they didn't let us down. Take a look at this.
What is the latest news story you know about South Africa?
I think there's something going on with Zuma, but I'm not quite sure what's going on exactly.
Well, I think I remember hearing some difficulty with the blacks not having an easy time, and that just makes me very sad. I mean, I really don't know enough about it, but I just feel that after having gone through so much, they should have an easier time. That's my main feeling, but I don't know.
I hear about apartheid and the continued problem about the white and the black. I think it's just a politician, and I think nowadays you continue with problems.
What is the latest news story you heard about South Africa?
I haven't really heard too much about it recently, that much.
That white farmers are trying to emigrate to Australia.
And what do you think about that?
I think it's awful. I think Australians should take in people who really need to be helped and refugees who actually are being persecuted, and not white South Africans.
Do you think South Africa was the last apartheid state in the world?
Yes and no. I think it's like the last apartheid state, but yeah, they all operate in different ways, so yeah, yes and no really.
In my opinion, yes. I mean, I know people feel that there are others that are considered apartheid. I don't consider that apartheid, but yeah, I think South Africa is, was absolutely officially apartheid, and I think that was the biggest one and the main one.
Do you think South Africa was the last apartheid state in the world?
Well, actually, I think there are a lot of dodgy places right now, so I don't know, but I suspect there's virtual apartheid in places that I don't know about, and I'm sad to say that.
What I did know about South Africa recently, that a woman was sent to jail for racism. I thought that was very funny. That it is actually a violation to be racist, that it's actually punishable.
Excellency, you represent the ANC here in London, and I'm grateful to you for being here. What did you think of the views of the London public? It wasn't exactly overwhelming endorsement of the current situation, was it?
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Jabu Sibeko. I'm the chairperson of the African National Congress here in the United Kingdom. I think my view or my interpretation is mixed views. I think most of the people, I think, they actually, I think their opinion is kind of like what is actually written in the newspapers, but not what is going on in South Africa. And I think I stand to be corrected, but I think it's about time that misconception needs to be corrected.
Please, correct.
Okay. Before I get into correcting that misconception, let me start with the very first speaker in here who thought South Africa has actually betrayed Zimbabwe. I just touched, a sentence would be sufficient for that. South Africa is a new democracy. I think we first voted in 1994, and when we took over the governance in South Africa in 1994, we did not want to emulate, the principles of the Western democracies by interfering with the business of the other states. We respect Zimbabwe. It's a country of its own. It's an independent state. So it's the government of the African National Congress had no business in interfering in the business of Zimbabwe. However, as part of this SADC community, it is imperative that they work together with that. But I think it was the wish of the Western democracies for South Africa to intervene and interfere because they themselves have actually failed. Okay, moving on from that. And I think the other issue that I need to touch on, while I appreciate my colleagues in here, giving an analysis of the situation right now, within the ANC, we quite rightly understand that there's been problems recently, particularly with the leadership of the former President Zuma and other forces which have been actually interfering with the state. Particularly, I know my friend here is saying we don't need to be talking about the Gupta family, but that has been the pronounced kind of like an intervention into the state that actually brought all these matters into limelight. I wish to remind everyone in here that I think when you look at the presidencies as they came on following from 1994 elections, in 1994 we had the very first president, Nelson Mandela, and each and every president is actually tasked with a responsibility for the term of office. The task for Nelson Mandela when he took over the presidency was national reconciliation. And I think prior to elections in 1994, it seemed like the South Africa was at the brink of a civil war, but then I think he came...
all the whites heading for Australia.
Exactly, yeah. But then what happened in there, I think he succeeded to create a rainbow nation, for people to understand that. I think referring to the Freedom Charter, I think the very first principle, it says the South Africa belongs to everyone who lives in it. And he managed to calm down the tempers that were flaring high, and then that is when things calmed down. The next term, which was the term of Thabo Mbeki, his responsibility was to rewrite the policies of the government. I think throughout that transition, we still had the policies of the former apartheid regime, and those policies were not intended to benefit the majorities of South Africa. And during the process of rewriting those policies, 10 years is a very short time when you are in government and when you are in politics. And subsequent to Thabo Mbeki, it became Jacob Zuma, who was then tasked with the responsibility of implementing those policies. It doesn't mean they were not implemented. There's been a lot of changes. And all those changes, they come with a lot of resistance. And we're quite aware that I think in the ANC, it has always been the issue since Mandela took over that we needed to address the inequalities that are prevailing in the country. We need to prevail the injustices that are prevailing in the country, because the majority of the people, which is more than 87%, are the people, indigenous people of South Africa. And the white minority in South Africa constitute about 13% with the other racial groupings. But they are the ones who are actually benefiting out of that. So it is unfortunate that, people expect South Africa, this young democracy, which is almost like 24 years old, to be operating like fully fledged democracies. I'm not justifying that the 24 years, it's a short time. It is a long time.
It's because we had such high opinions of you, that we had such high expectations of you.
Exactly.
See, corruption in Britain is normal because this is a corrupt country of which we have no expectations at all. Our ruling class are criminals. We always knew that.
I'm not justifying...
But we didn't think the ANC ruling class would be criminals.
Yeah. I'm not justifying that. I mean, I think in this room, if anyone can tell me which government is not corrupt, I'm not suggesting that everybody should be corrupt. The only a key issue with the South Africa, I mean, it is hailed, the best constitution in the country. It's because it contains one principle, which is transparency. So that is why it's being communicated, it's being exposed, and then everybody else, I mean, they're hiding their own corruption. That is why we don't know about it.
Fair point.
Thank you.
Fair point. Let's take this lady here.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, Jabu. Oh, sorry. I'm Vuiswang Ngubongwana. I'm a broadcaster with a background in community development work. I agree with what you're saying, Jabu, about it's important that we need to remember the context historically. And I'm very Africa-focused. And when you look at our struggles from Cape to Cairo, you look at South Africa as the last bastion, if you like, for me, in terms of understanding the process of how to sabotage a revolution, in terms of our political education. And in South Africa, it's a great learning opportunity. Nelson Mandela was the peacemaker. That he must be lauded for that, whatever you think. He stopped the bloodletting and the chaos that could have been destructive beyond measure. We can't really say, right? So, all praise to Mandela forever. I will never say a bad word for him, even though I recognize in terms of the politics, it was a betrayal on the land question, ultimately, right? I understand that, but I still praise you for being the peacemaker. Now, the ANC is learning, like any African political party, how to navigate the machinations of imperialism, is how I would put it, because South Africa has always had challenges, aside from the problem of dealing with apartheid, of every opportunity of community building being sabotaged by other elements. And that is what has happened in South Africa. We can write many books, and I'm glad we're so articulate. We are going to break down exactly how our movements were broken down, how our most articulate people were destroyed and poisoned at critical points in our history. This is why I'm so excited to be a South African at this time in Earth history. I think we are showing the world something incredible about human development, how to deal with the race issue, how to actually deal with it as opposed to hide it like America has done for centuries. We will do it, and I think we will be an inspiration for the world to follow. How do you heal these dynamics, particularly in South Africa, where it was so horrific? I mean, people were getting thrown into ovens for sitting on the master's dog. I mean, these are the stories that need to be told, so we can contextualize who we are, so that the guilty white conscience of people who want to fight and help can come in and feel welcomed and understood. Because at the moment, our nation is in danger of cleaving into those old divisions that fragmented us in the first place. And I would be heartbroken to see political movements among African people fragmenting on the basis of which ism is better than this ism schism nonsense. I want us to get into Ubuntu thinking, which is happening more and more, because socialism, capitalism, as far as Africa is concerned, is an ism. That's meaningless. Right? But in terms of actually making society work, let's go back to our African voice. We have Ubuntu.
That sounds like an ism to me.
But it's
what's an African voice?
An African
He's got
voice.
An African voice.
Okay.
You've got an African voice. He's got one. He's got one.
But
they're all different voices.
Culturally speaking, the voices that dominate the media sphere are European in their thinking. I'm sorry, that's just how it goes. So people don't know an African voice for sure because they've never seen a dominant African cultural expression anywhere. And South Africa is going to be a leading force, as far as I'm concerned, in showing the world. And this memorial, my gosh, how inspirational to see how we lauded and praised this woman. Who cares about the propaganda war to destroy her name? We know what she did. And the way we praised her, people are going to ask, oh, why did they sing that song? This is how we learn about each other. This is how we learn about each other. And I'm just excited to be an African. And back to the very first question you asked, George, to complete, how different will Ramaphosa be from Zuma? Ramaphosa is the educated pragmatist. He's going to tread that fine line because he made his millions, as you were saying earlier on, off the backs of the imbalanced deal that was created to distribute wealth more equally among Africans. He knows this contradiction.
He's a friend of mine. I wasn't actually referring to him.
No, but I'm just
take this
as an example.
Yeah,
but I just want to say I have hope in him.
There's only 3 minutes left in this segment. Go ahead.
My name is Ayo Johnson. I'm a journalist that specialises on African news across the continent. What I can say is that South Africa and all South Africans have to be slightly more humble with the fact that they've come a long way. 24 years from Mandela to Motlanthe to Mbeki and, of course, Zuma and, of course, the current president, you could see a trajectory of positivity. And I think the bottom line here is how do we go back to delivering for the manifesto of the ANC and the movement, what it was all about, which is creating jobs, reducing inequality, providing housing, and creating this new South Africa that everyone has been talking about. I think the expectation levels are so high, but it's bridging that gap. And I think the leadership structure have never been able to do so because of the South Africans put themselves in places where they shouldn't really be doing, but their economy has done so well over time, not more so most recently, that they've become a superpower on the African continent. And so the expectation levels above from a continent perspective is so high, from a global perspective it's even higher, that it puts that additional pressure on the mechanisms that they have, which are very fragile. And how do they make sure their governance structures are strong enough to be able to deliver for their people, creating this inequality which it seems to be engulfing every day. So I think South Africans have to be appreciative of where they've come from, but mindful of the challenges ahead. And of course understanding that their presidents are only human, and they've come a very, very long way. These are people who fought for their freedom, who are I mean, when we talk about people fighting for their freedom, you think about people who've passed away. A lot of them are still alive. A lot of them are still in government. So it shows that they haven't really come that long, that far in this very short period of time. And I think South Africans have to be slightly more appreciative of how far they've come. And I think sometimes they cannot lose that. They want so much more, and they sort of forget where they've come from.
There'll be more after this.
وهناك وثيقة أمريكية وهي وثيقة مهمة أن ما حدث في سوريا منذ عام 2011 هو يكاد يكون تطبيق حرفي للوثيقة التي وضعتها المخابرات الأمريكية في عام 1986.
كلمة with me, George Galloway, for Al-Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London, discussing South Africa. We took the Kalama cameras out onto the streets of London. Let's hear what the people said.
What do you think the Mandela family's legacy is?
I loved Mandela. I remember the demonstrations, Free Mandela, here in London. It was so exciting when it finally happened. Oh my God, that was wonderful. But I'm not so sure about Winnie. Or Minnie? What? Winnie. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know. It just feels like a bit of a contamination of something that was gorgeous and beautiful.
Mostly good. I mean, what little I know of it, I mean, I know he was very good and, he helped finish apartheid and did that struggle. I think, and I can't swear to it, but I think Winnie had a lot of scandals and that kind of hurt her legacy. But that's, as I said, I'm not as knowledgeable as I'd like to be about the whole thing.
What do you think, in your opinion, is the Mandela family's legacy?
It's always very difficult to speak of a legacy because there's always two sides to it. Yeah. We enjoy putting him on a pedestal, but at the same time we'd like to forget that he was not always on that pedestal, and it took a long time before he got there.
I've heard that they've removed racism from South Africa and all of that, but I don't really have that many opinions on it because I'm always a bit in the middle, so I never really say much at all.
Well, the job that has been done on Winnie Mandela clearly has reached the people, many of them, maybe even most of them. Dr. Brilliant, first start with Winnie Mandela, will you?
I will. I'm very saddened by what I've just seen, the responses about Winnie Mandela. It's very clear that, well, I'll use the language that the ANC is refusing to accept, that white monopoly capital, which obviously controls the media world over, and of course in South Africa, has been able to valorize the criminalization of Winnie Mandela and the sanctification of Nelson Mandela, and of course the failure to acknowledge that the person who kept Nelson Mandela's name alive and the name of the ANC very much alive was actually Winnie Mandela. The person on whose shoulders the struggle for freedom in South Africa actually literally was almost hanging every day was Winnie Mandela. It's even interesting because I was discussing with my colleague here, Dr. Mpofu. We were discussing about the time when Nelson Mandela comes out of prison and he is actually addressing a rally. He couldn't read, so he didn't have spectacles. And guess what? The spectacles that he actually had to wear for him to see the world, to actually project, were Winnie spectacles. Isn't that symbolic itself? Yes. That actually should tell us something about Winnie Mandela. But here is a lady who got married at a young age and everything about her marriage was swindled away from her. Here is a lady who actually became both the mother and the father of these children, but also managed to even become the mother and the father again of the nation. The struggling nation, the suffering nation, stood as an icon, as a symbol of everything that you should aspire to if you want to fight for your freedom, for your humanity. I get so worried sometimes when I see these same people who put you in prison for 27 years and then later on turn around and begin to, sanctify you as this angel that just dropped from heaven. Why didn't they see all these angelic aspects in the 27 years? All of a sudden, Nelson Mandela becomes this thing, even as my colleague was saying that, when Nelson Mandela, was on his deathbed, there was so much talk. I even had colleagues here, in the Western world who would come to me and say, oh, I hear Nelson Mandela is unwell. I get so worried about the future of South Africa after Nelson Mandela. Really? And then I look at them and say, and a number of them will come to me after the passing on of Nelson Mandela and say to me, oh, I'm so sorry, I've heard that Nelson Mandela has passed on, and he was a good guy. I said, since when did you discover he was a good guy? And all of a sudden, today we are told Winnie is, they want to valorize these misdeeds. They are saying Winnie Mandela did this, Winnie Mandela is that bad. But one thing we all know for a fact is that pre-independent South Africa, Winnie stood for what we all aspired for. Post-independent, Winnie was the only person who remained talking about the failures of the apartheid, of the ANC government. She was there for us. She even is the one who has continued to even inspire the young people of South Africa. And must I add this? You see, the passing on of Winnie has actually done one thing. It has helped us. Maybe I need to help my colleague who is in the ANC to understand something. When we offer a critique of ANC, it does not necessarily mean that we actually hate ANC. Some of us are actually children of ANC. Our fathers were part of Umkhonto weSizwe. We are offering what is called immanent critique. We are aware of the failures of a post-colonial state, and we are actually informed. We also are looking at it with the projections of the future, because we are the future of South Africa. So if you deny me a voice because you feel I am criticizing you, you are actually denying yourself the vision into the future. We want to acknowledge one thing, that Winnie Mandela spoke and acknowledged so many things. Even her death now reminds us of so many things that ANC has failed to achieve. But her passing on provides us an opportunity to resurrect Nelson Mandela, try him in the public court of law, and as the young people, be able to say, look, I'm young, we are exuberant. Young people are obviously expected to speak with the exuberance. And even my critique is not going to be one that mollifies you. It's one that's going to be causing you to have an knee-jerk reaction. But the point is, her passing on is helping us to start looking at a lot of things that Winnie Mandela talked about. Things that are actually so dear to most of us, black people in South Africa. The disparities that continue there. We need to acknowledge one thing. the potential of a person who has been stealing or has survived on stealing for a long time and become a billionaire to then transform and become this, philanthropic person is actually zero when you look at it in the scale of 1 to 10. And if you look at Cyril and tell me that Cyril, because he has been already hobnobbing with these people and is likely then today to start thinking about my suffering and the suffering of those people who live in those RDP houses and those Abathalem Kukwin, and that is going to feel for them, actually he wants to steal more. If given an opportunity, he would want to get more. In fact, the reason why Cyril is actually in that position, the reason why, well, you're free to disagree with me, but I've lived in a state where I saw people looting. I saw people pretending to be standing for us. In Zimbabwe, I've seen all that. What I want to highlight to you is that I'm aware that the people who actually are handlers for Cyril, which is one of the things that our brother here talked about earlier on, the issue of the Guptas and so forth, why the Guptas are already being talked about, they are the main thing, they are up there. It's simply because the same white monopoly capital this time around felt dribbled from the economic plate. And they felt that, oh, okay, someone is taking over, and this time around it was the Indians. And then they felt, oh, right, we need to challenge this. So they use their same media that they have always controlled to actually present the Guptas in a particular way. But they have always been doing this. Who was presenting them in that particular way? Which explains why, for example, right now in South Africa, there is a particular media organization that just came out, and it has been presenting all these, trying to balance Mzwanele Mwanyi's media organization. And we are aware that it will be stopping, its broadcasts in the main, vein because of being seen as challenging the white monopoly narrative. So those are some of the challenges we
Yes, very interesting. We'll come back to them, and the ANC will answer them, of course. Yes, madam.
Okay, my name is Nomonde Ndwalaza. I'm a student at the London School of Economics. I think a lot has been said today, but I think I want to touch on issues of race relations and what happens now. Because I come from a generation where I have no lived experience of apartheid, but I have parents who had their opportunities arrested, and so I understand apartheid through what my parents and what my parents of my peers lost. And so I was asked a question by the gentleman next to me about what the possibilities are for there to be legitimate friendship and kinship between black people and white people going forward, and if that is itself a possibility at all.
Just keep hold of your handbag. That's what
I think it's a very, very difficult question. I think one of the biggest problems I think with South Africa is that we are very invested in symbolism. So we love the symbolism of Mother of the Nation. We love the symbolism of the rainbow of the Rainbow Nation, and that in itself comes with a lot of possibilities, but it comes with a lot of limitations in terms of hiding what a lot of problems are that we're facing, right? So the Rainbow Nation itself is a problem because the past is not past. And in a lot of ways, it's a problem because white people in South Africa have never known what to do with black people's feelings, and they still don't know what to do. We have learned to center them. We have learned to always have to think about them, to not be offensive to them, to our own detriment. So when we speak about reconciliation, we should actually be speaking about how black people were conciliated into forgiveness, and how today a lot of black people are angry because a lot of them are still poor. A lot of them had a lot of dreams that they were promised by the Mandelas of the world, and those dreams were not achieved. And so when I think about my white peers in South Africa, my white peers in the world, I think about how a lot of white South Africans that I meet here in the UK are South Africans that are here on an ancestral visa, right? And so they have the luxury of being able to tap out of South Africa in ways that I don't. Yeah. And so I find that myself and my peers are invested in South Africa because South Africa is the only place that we have. South Africa needs to work, and it needs to work for us because we are the children of people that have so many dreams, and we are our ancestors' wildest dreams, essentially. And so I think for me to have legitimate friendships with white people in my world and white space, I need white people to understand my history as a South African. They need to understand that apartheid was just so much more than just a series of violent acts that happened and then stopped, and then now we're all just kumbaraying into the sunset, right? We need to understand that even today, with Winnie's death, there were white people on Twitter that were celebrating her death. people that have no historical context of who she was and who she meant to us. You know, and some things like that are things that are just very violent, even in the context of how there is no historical record that says apartheid was a crime against humanity. A lot of South Africans are not clear on that. And so how can we be so invested in moving forward, forgetting the past, when we aren't even clear about what the past is, when we don't even know who our own heroes are? Like Bram Fischer for me is someone that I came to know through a play, because even as someone who did history, there isn't much education that I felt that I had. And so even on someone like Winnie Mandela, how do then white people feel as though we can move forward and we can all claim a South Africa that is our own when we don't all know the same history, right? And so that's just my issue with race relations and just moving forward. Another thing that I want to touch on is really just Winnie and how there's just been a huge contestation on what her legacy becomes, right? And it's just been very interesting to me to see how there's been a lot of black women, particularly in the public sphere, who are very clear about how if you don't take part in the writing of the archives, then your history will be taken away from you. But I think we also just need to be honest to ourselves and to each other about what the consequences of being a Winnie in the world is, right? Winnie was a disruptor. Winnie was unbowed. And in a lot of in all parts of the world, there are consequences that come to being a woman like that. And so for even with us in our own spaces, we have Winnies, right? We have Winnies, we have women that go against the grain, and we have women that are continuously silenced because there is a social cost to being a Winnie in the world. And in some ways, Winnie's legacy is also forgotten because of the fact that she stood against the ANC, she stood against patriarchy in ways that people look at you, men will look at you, and women as well will be like, okay, you're like that, there will be consequences and we will silence you. And so I think for me, Winnie's legacy should also just be a lesson to ourselves about the types of women that we want to become, the types of women that we want to celebrate, and also just being clear about how we need to celebrate each other while we're still alive to see it as well.
Yeah. Bravo. Well, comrade, the future's bright if you've got a cadre like that. Yes?
Before I start, I'd just like to say one obvious contribution to Winnie's legacy is a sister like this that sits beside me and her contribution. I'm just going to respond to a few of the comments from the crowd that make my contribution. So one of the points that you said about Zimbabwe and that South Africa should have showed solidarity. Well, Mbeki did show solidarity when he refused to help Tony Blair when Tony Blair wanted intervention into Zimbabwe to save white farmers. So that was Mbeki and South Africa's intervention into Zimbabwe and for the Zimbabwe people by not causing a fire next door. That's the first point. The second point about isms and schisms with respect to voice war, we have this idea that because of colonization, anything European, anything that is not from Africa is therefore negative to Africa, which is not the case. The way that we develop as a society is we take the best from each part of the world and we contribute that and we make it African. And that's what the great leaders of this continent have done. The Thomas Sankaras, the Kwame Nkrumahs, the Patrice Lumumbas. So I think one of the reasons, one of the failures of South Africa and what the ANC did was moving away from the socialist principles of the Freedom Charter, the socialist principles that would have taken South Africa from being a society that looks that in apartheid's time that contributed to a small elite into being one that contributes for everybody. And recently, it would have been 25 years since the assassination of Chris Hani, who was a socialist, who's somebody that could have articulated and pressured the ANC leadership into staying close and determined to their principles.
That's why they killed him.
That's why they killed him.
Exactly, that's why he was killed.
We'll have to leave it there, because there's a break coming up. Welcome back to Kalimuhurra, discussing South Africa. The last segment, let's press on. Madam, you have the floor.
Yeah, my name is Thandi Makiwane, and like gentlemen here, I'm the daughter of the veterans of the ANC. I would like to say first, just to make it international, that I am so sorry we're starting a war in Syria when we can see the Palestinian children dying the same way that South Africa have done. And in Yemen as well. And I think that's where then people have to realize these contradictions that we are facing in South Africa. Because our governments have to be seen to be civilized in order to fit in these two worlds. South Africa is the most complex country. We've got a large, settled monopoly capital, a white monopoly capital population, and black people who have never been acknowledged in our history. The British fought the Dutch, and we were not there. Right through, even though with the wages, they've not changed. 25 years, the miners are still earning exactly what they were earning under apartheid. The domestic workers are still earning the same. What Margaret Thatcher did was to go and kill off the fantastic unions that were progressing in South Africa, so that by the time they come with this imperialism, it will be difficult for ANC to do anything if they don't have the budget to do it. That's why our children are only going to white schools. And those white black schools have been developed because it needs money. And South Africa is always being pushed by the DA, which I see as a racist party, to say that they are actually corrupt or overspending or whatever it is. So the apartheid parties have never died. They have stayed within this AfriForm, another thing, AfriForm, which is no different from Hitler to me, as far as I'm concerned. And they are actually represented within this modern democracy. So all the painful parts of being dominated by white minority capital remains. Banks that were there for black people have now closed. So there is no way even for enterprise to develop, because now the jobs, of course, are no longer there. The guy who said that they've moved up to Africa, to the rest of Africa, to build up their own empire, Africa. They have not developed any of those factories in Africa, so in South Africa. So now we actually depend on the dole of South Africa or old people's pension for actually looking after our children. So I think it's very difficult. It's difficult to see because I'm a socialist and very proud of it. And I think it's very difficult to see how we think that one of the most richest countries in Africa can actually have 90% of the population not having toilets, not having houses, not having schools, not having food. And to me, and that is also, and then the politician group, I don't blame them to a certain extent, except I think they are naive. If they think that they can highlight the corruption of one man in South Africa, Zuma, and the Guptas, and see that as corruption. Whereas in fact, even that part of it, KPMG, is a British company that actually set up and established all that. So it's very difficult, it's superficial for us to see, always criticizing ourselves or each other. The South African revolution needs to start. It has not started. And
that's a good note to end on.
Yes.
Let me take the lady behind you.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Rosie. I'm a French teacher in a secondary school. When you were talking about Winnie Mandela, I was trying to remember what I remembered when I was a girl growing up about her, and it's you know, sadly it's quite pitiful. It's a bit similar to the interviews that you saw on the television, and all I can remember was that she was glamorous. I mean, these things obviously say nothing for her as her legacy, but that it was quite negative, and that if I were to be asked now what was her legacy, I wouldn't know. And some of the things that you were saying, that's really the first time I've heard them, and just to, you know, to show you what our history
No, that's very
is.
helpful. In fact, she was a freedom fighter. Yes. She was a hero. Yes. She was the mother of free South Africa. Let's take this gentleman here. Yes?
My intervention would be on land and race relations. Firstly, I think the ANC needs to conscientize and actually help black South Africans to buy into the idea of owning land rather than being employees. And once you cultivate that mentality of working the land and actually deferring instant gratifications, because once you work the land, you don't get your rewards immediately after 2 hours of planting. It takes a long time. And we need to put that mentality into black people and into black South Africans, especially that now that the ANC is actually going to take the land or give the land to the people, the takers must be well trained, right? So that you do not get into a situation where people have the land but are not being productive. And also there's this narrative that all the time when there's the land talk, you are told, look at Zimbabwe. South Africa is going to be like Zimbabwe. It needs to stop. And seriously so. This is a South African project. Let's concentrate on what we have. What is the expertise that you have in South Africa? What is it that you want to do with this land in 50, 20, or whatever years' time? Do you want to create millionaires who are farmers or millionaires who are just into BEE projects where blackness is actually meant to bring money, or you join a white corporation, a front, you get a lot of money out of it?
Good point. That's the only one I can let you make. No, brilliant next, and then His Excellency has to respond.
Oh, okay, he's still here to respond. Thank you. I just want to add some of the points that my colleague has just raised, and also what Umama has just said. I'm so humbled to notice that we have elders in our midst who are able to see these things and actually articulate them the way you see we wish them to be articulated. You see, we need to transform the concept of Ubuntu to one that actually just doesn't compete with these isms you are talking about, my sister, but to one that actually makes our people understand that their humanity is part and parcel of the emancipatory project that's brought about by this process of land redistribution. How do you do that? You conscientize the people, make them realize the value of their humanity, what we call the psycho-spirituality aspect of the land to them. And the moment we make our people get to understand the value of land, what it will bring to them, it will then bring all these aspects that my brother is talking about. Because let's contextualize the South African situation a bit. South Africa is one of the countries that's so shocking when you look at, even in terms of, just at an economic level. Do you know that in South Africa, the Reserve Bank of South Africa is actually not a state, it's not actually not a state institution? If people didn't know that, it's actually a private institution with individuals, some of them from Germany, who actually own the highest shares. Now, that should tell you something about it. And this is the leadership, here is the leadership that actually negotiated such a deal. What were they negotiating for? Were they really negotiating with my future in mind? They didn't have my future in mind. In a sense, it is us, the younger generation, that has to begin to question those things. Also, coming to the issues that my sister here raised, even the issues of race relations. You can't talk to me about race relations until and unless my humanity has been brought up and I'm able to know that at an economic level, I'm actually not competing with you, but I'm actually at par with you. If at economic level I've been denied all these opportunities, then you can't come to me and say, do you think I can be friends with you? I don't have to look for friendship. I have to actually look for my humanity. And this brings me to another issue, the issue of corruption. You see, I'll tell you what I think corruption is. If you deny my humanity from 1912, even when we claim we have gotten freedom, you still make me feel unfree and deny my humanity still, and you put some of my leaders for 27 years in prison. They come out of prison, you valorize them, sanctify them, make them gods because they become your gods. They have shown that they are prepared to forgive you. Still, you deny me access to these economic, access that will make me a human being. You are actually the most corrupt person. The only corrupt person that I should be talking about now in South Africa is not this Gupta guy. It is actually the person who has disenfranchised our people, caused them to even, when people were, a few months ago, people in South Africa, there were white farmers who were marching. And these white farmers, when they were marching, they were actually in the streets, some of them with tractors blocking the streets. We had some of our black people carrying placards saying, without a white farmer, there will be no pap. Wow. Now, that is very worrying. Now that person has been corrupted. And who corrupted that person? The person who corrupted that person denied them Ubuntu Bab. And that person is actually the most corrupt person. So we have really a big challenge to deal with in the case of South Africa.
By the way, I was asked to forgive the policeman who bloodied my nose. And I did forgive him, but I didn't actually mean it. I will never forgive him. Excellency, the final word to you, and before you do, let me just say this. It's because we love you and revere you that we criticize you. If you were ordinary, we would have ordinary expectations of you. It's because we knew you for decades, and we knew the sophistication and the level of conscientization in your ranks that we expect better. Yes. Please.
Thank you once again. I don't know where to start. I think there's been quite a number of issues. If I had a pen, I probably would have noted them down and then I could probably be responding. I mean, in all fairness, I don't come in here to claim I'm an expert in the politics of the African National Congress. And at the same time, I'm quite rightly saying is I'm not necessarily feeling like I'm being criticized. I'm here to take lessons which I can then go back and share with our constituencies and with our leadership so that they can actually recognize where are we not going well and what is it that we are not doing right for our communities. I think I quite rightly acknowledge my sister here said apartheid was a crime against humanity. It hasn't only eroded the thinking of the people. It has actually eroded the spirits of the people. That is why the people of South Africa function the way they function. And we quite rightly recognize that. I think in 1994, when we said we have obtained our democracy, all what we succeeded was to get a political independence. But there's still a crucial gap in terms of the economic freedom. That is why South Africa it's still the way it is, and we need to recognize that. I mean, South Africa, it's kind of like when you go to South Africa, you're going into two worlds. Yeah. You talk about race relations in South Africa. I mean, you never see white people living in black townships. And then you tell me you talk about race relations. I mean, prior to coming to this country, I used to work for an organization which is called the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation. We're in the Truth and Reconciliation Project. Part of the project was to implement some of the decisions from the TRC. I can say to you today, if you think South Africans will reconcile with the white minorities when there were no reparations paid for the atrocities that were committed against the people of the country, you must be joking. And how do you forgive the person who hasn't actually asked for an apology? They haven't apologized. Instead, they're actually reaping even more. They are actually punishing the very same minorities are still continuing to perpetrate the very same atrocities that they perpetrated before. And you look at the opposition, the second largest opposition, the Democratic Alliance. It is an alliance with the very same structure that actually perpetrated apartheid in the country. And those are the people who are actually making it difficult for the the government of the African National Congress to implement. They are blocking the path. And when we mention the Gupta it's only kind of like it's kind of like it's a cream. Basically, the very same elements of corruption, the institutions of corruption are entrenched within our societies. I mean, you mentioned KPMG. Those are the institutions that are actually blocking the implementation of some of the projects in South Africa. It's not only I think it's easier for us to kind of like identify. I think the very same people who actually put in Gupta there to interfere with the running of the government, they're sick and tired of them. They're not actually achieving what they need to achieve. So they now need to find somebody else who can actually implement their own policies. I mean, they're not happy that the African National Congress is taken on. So there are efforts. I mean, the third forces are still there, to prevent, the ANC to run the government smoothly.
Well, let's hope so. The honourable lady next to you mentioned Margaret Thatcher. As some of you know, I was almost 30 years in the British Parliament, and part of that was when she was the Prime Minister. And I'm one of those who saw her lips move and heard her describe the now sanctified Nelson Mandela as a terrorist, and the ANC that you represent as a terrorist organization. She's long dead now, which I shan't comment on, but the mentality of Margaret Thatcher is still prevalent in this white monopoly-controlled media. And I'd put it this way to you. When they start to love you, you must be doing something wrong. When the power in the world loves you, you're definitely on the wrong track. So keep annoying them, please. And lastly, I want to say this. Contrary to what was said on the screen, there is still an apartheid European colonialist state in the world. It's called Israel. If you want your say, it's yoursay@kalimahorra.com. Thanks for being with me this evening.